So here's something interesting. I'm at northern KZN, and behind me is the Richards Bay Coal Terminal, commonly known as RBCT. This is the largest coal export facility in Africa. Coal is a very important commodity to South Africa. Our coal reserves are estimated to be at 53 billion tons, and with our present production rate, there should be almost 200 years worth of coal supply left under our earth. Last year, 50 million tons were exported from Richards Bay. Although this was lower than optimal export levels, at an assumed average price of 300 tons last year, South Africa exported 200 to 283 billion rands worth of coal from this very port. Coal is a major economic driver for us as a country. The country's coal mining industry employs 87,000 people, about 20% of total mining industry employment. Those very same people earn between 24 and 30 billion rand in wages and salaries every single year. 70% of the coal mined in South Africa is consumed domestically. Only 30% is exported out of Richards Bay. Coal is the second most important energy source in the world after oil. It is also one of the cheapest and most abundant energy carriers that we possess as a country. In South Africa, coal remains an essential component of our country's energy mix. Coal accounts for 70% of our primary energy consumption and about 75% of our electricity generation. It also accounts for 30% of petroleum liquid fuels. Coal is South Africa's highest foreign currency earner. The coal sector generates about 10% of South Africa's total foreign exchange reserves. But with all these numbers demonstrating the importance of coal to South Africa, we face an uphill battle to continue using this black and truly valuable substance. The global climate agenda has moved against coal in order to decrease the use of it in favor of climate agreements. Just last year, South Africa was given the green light that over the next 5 years it would receive $8.5 billion in a fund, loan, or Bambalana Ntwana type of amount. What is being said about this $8.5 billion is that 90% of it is meant to be used to decommission our coal-fired power stations in South Africa, while also developing renewable energy generation in the country. Well, that's at least what's being said. What isn't being said, however, is whether or not we have to pay this money back and at what percentage of interest that would be at. I mean, that should be public knowledge, right? I mean, since a lot of you watching this will still be alive to pay this amount off. The truth is, I'm currently not entirely sold on this whole thing. Renewables currently available to South Africa are unreliable, and many countries across the world have proven this to be true. These energy sources just aren't there yet. The story of coal in South Africa is the story of Africa's most industrialized economy, fighting for its competitive industrial advantage in a world that is saying we should stop using our most important resource because they spent the last 100 years building their economies while messing up the planet that we all live on. And now we must all carry this collective responsibility for fixing it, while also slowing down our progress and our country's development. There actually isn't a topic that gets me as fired up as this one. And I'm sorry that the intro has been this long, but I have a lot to say and I want to get started.
Let me give you two pieces of information. Germany is dismantling a wind farm to expand operations of a coal mine today, as we sit here today. I can tell you that coal miners in the United States are putting pressure on President Biden to invest more on coal production. Here we say we must leave coal. I am one of the people who says we can have a transition, but that coal is not about just numbers. It's about human beings. It's 10 towns in Mpumalanga, and I can give you the names if you want them. I don't add Standerton, I don't add Vereeniging, I don't add Lephalale, I don't add Newcastle. Just the coal belt is 10 towns. It's your Belfast, it's your Carolina, it's your Ermelo, it's your Hendrina, it's your Middelburg, it's your Malahleni, it's Ogies, it's Kriel, it's Leslie, and it's Delmas. So if you just talk recklessly about that, you are going to leave many people in darkness and starving.
As you can see, there are some in government who are fighting for a more well thought out transition from coal. The renewable energy disruptors keep trumpeting the same propaganda that government is denying people an environmentally unsecure future. Now, who does it make sense to close power stations immediately and let people starve? To understand coal in South Africa, you have to understand the province of the rising sun, Mpumalanga. With an estimated GDP of 323 billion rand, Mpumalanga is 7 to 8% of South Africa's economy. But the province punches way above its weight. Mpumalanga is undoubtedly the province of electricity. And because we generate our power from coal, Mpumalanga is coal country. Around 85% of South Africa's coal mining jobs are situated in Mpumalanga. The real issue of coal in South Africa is not about the numbers and the economic impact. It's also about the people on the ground whose lives depend on coal for their livelihood. For instance, in South Africa, coal is found in 19 coal fields located in mainly Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and the Free State, with lesser amounts in Gauteng, Northwest Province, and the Eastern Cape. As much as 70% of that coal is located in the Waterberg, Witbank, and Highveld coal fields, as well as lesser amounts in the Ermelo, Free State, and Springbok flat coal field. To go even further, the coal industry is very much concentrated in Mpumalanga, and it accounts for about 80% of all coal production in South Africa. 72% of Mpumalanga's mining activity takes place in the Nkangala district municipality, which carries a considerable amount of those small coal towns. Gertsibande district is second in Mpumalanga, and it carries about 24% of the mining output of the province. It is these 13 plus towns within the Mpumalanga and northern KZN coal areas that drive most, if not all, of the coal production and coal's economic impact on South Africa. The Mpumalanga Highveld, unsurprisingly, is home to 12 of Eskom's 15 coal-fired power stations. This is the engine that drives the South African car, at least for the near-distant future. All these factors rightly result in there being a large dependency on the exploitation of coal in Mpumalanga and even in northern KZN in order to drive the regional and our national economy. Everyone in these areas is very dependent on the coal economy to provide for themselves and their families. But those provisions are still not enough. Mpumalanga residents have a yearly GDP per capita figure of 78,000 rand, which equals 6,500 rand or $361 per month for the average person. This is the reality on the ground, my fellow South Africans. The socio-economic impact on the population is, to me, one of the most important issues when we speak about coal. And I feel like it's not being addressed. Approximately 705,000 people live in the Mpumalanga coal belt. And when you add Newcastle and northern KZN, that number jumps to 1.1 million people who are directly impacted by the coal industry. What must be clear is that these are the most vulnerable people in South Africa, earning from the coal economy. The irony about this coal conversation is that many people with fancy suits, big degrees, and nice cars from South Africa and even abroad often quick to vilify the government and say that our government isn't helping tier 2 and 3 town economies. Who does it make sense to currently prioritize the environment above the people of Mpumalanga and their employment, as well as their economic participation? By its own admission, the Just Energy Transition Plan says that coal fleet closures will directly impact about 90,000 coal workers in mines and power plants in poverty-stricken Mpumalanga. The entire value chain, from mining and electricity production to end-use sectors, employs 200,000 people. This was in 2020. Between 4,500 and 7,500 new jobs will not materialize. This is what the plan states. Over the next decade, almost 18,500 older workers will leave coal mining, and many of those people will require social support, likely because they can't be reskilled. Now I ask again, who does it make sense to shut down South Africa completely and limit its economic aspirations in this way? I want you to understand me correctly. What we are not saying is that climate change isn't real. No. What we are saying is that there is an outsized focus on the environment over people when it comes to coal. There is no clear plan to preserve the jobs, and by the plan's own admission, it can't reskill nor absorb everyone. So maybe they're hoping people would just vanish. I don't know. The state must now prematurely take care of these people who would be working and earning. Well, to be clear, by keeping the coal economy thriving, government is keeping these forgotten and mostly overlooked vital small coal towns employed, at least for now, until the plan makes sense. Coal is part of the heritage of Mpumalanga. It is the backbone of our economy. 70% of Eskom's generation capacity is in Mpumalanga. Just in Emalahleni, it's estimated that outside of government community services, almost 80% of the residents work and generate income by being employed at Eskom, Transnet, and at peripheral private industries, mainly through the coal mining, transportation, and the energy generation economy. The same Emalahleni area is also home to more than 3,000 artisan miners who contribute to the local economy through paying rent, buying goods, and providing jobs. Without creating a realistic alternative economy for the people in Mpumalanga's coal belt, this energy transition runs the risk of collapsing an entire province that generates power for all of us. I'm not even exaggerating, guys. I sit here and I truly wonder, why is it only Gwede Mantashe who's openly speaking loudly about this part of the transition? It's almost like the people in Mpumalanga are a footnote in all of these proposed energy plans. Why? What are the people of Mpumalanga meant to do if we shut down all of the power stations? Is there even a plan? You know what? Let me just try to assume what might happen. Without the coal economy, more people from Mpumalanga will migrate to, you guessed it, Gauteng, Johannesburg, and other urban centers. Thus, one, this will exacerbate an already overstretched economic and social environment in these small towns that they leave. Two, negatively affect the resources and infrastructure in the bigger cities that they go to, which currently can't cope with rural to urban migration as it currently stands. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, and the devil will truly be in the detail. Maybe all these questions that I have will be in this 163 billion rand dollar loan that we suddenly just got. So you know what? Let's go open this can of worms. South Africa getting this first tranche of the 163 billion rand loan from the West is a rather important point for many reasons. Some of them relate to climate, some of them geopolitical, and some of them just plain horrendous long-term policy. In late 2021 in Glasgow at COP26, COP26 is the UN's climate change conference. The US and the EU, aka the Western governments, pledged $8.5 billion towards South Africa's transition away from coal. This loan was conveniently called a catalytic loan, the first of many that we should take. At last year's COP27, the first real money started to flow towards South Africa from this very deal. This is when the country secured its first tranche of the loan, 600 million euro, 10.7 billion rand, from the US, the UK, France, Germany, and the EU. Now, because no one has ever really explained what's actually in this 163 billion rand loan, I think we should start unpacking everything and start there. The first place we need to start is a document that's titled South Africa's Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, the JET-IP, for the initial period of 2023 to 2027. What must be simply understood is that the JET plan is in essence a plan to decommission South Africa's coal-fired power stations by 2035, starting almost immediately this year. Our politicians committed us as a country to reducing carbon and thus coal emissions to within a range of 420 to 350 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, MTCO2, by 2030. By the way, South Africa is already in the fair contribution target range for climate emissions according to the UN. Statista.com trackers suggest that our current 2022 emissions are well below the necessary targets at 404 MTCO2. We are currently 15th in the world when it comes to emissions. Just for context, the same countries that are giving South Africa money to get off coal produce 7.2 billion megatons of CO2, which is 17 times what South Africa emits into the environment. The United States alone produces 4.5 billion megatons of CO2. All of Africa contributes just 4% of global carbon emissions at 1.45 billion tons of CO2. But I guess we are the problem. We are still the problem, right? Make it make sense. Now, a lot happened at this UN climate conference in 2020. South Africa ended up saying, yeah, we can meet these targets, but we need investment to move away from coal and thus meet these goals. Why on earth did we say this? It's so insane to me. What we should have said at that UN conference is that we need financing to diversify our energy grid. We also want to include reliable forms of energy. We went and committed to swapping dependable energy supply for untested and unreliable renewable energy. What is even more frustrating is that we committed to do this during an energy crisis. Be that as it may, we even put a number to this supposed investment, 1.5 trillion rand. Wait. That amount sounds a little too similar to an amount I've heard before. Oh, wait. That's right. In 2014, South Africa's media reported that we had tentatively agreed to Russia's state-owned Rosatom building up to 8 nuclear reactors in South Africa. This was so that we could get up to 9.6 gigawatts of extra power for almost 1 trillion rand, which was actually 700 million, but you know how the South African media rounds up when it suits them. South Africa's civil society and the opposition didn't want that plan. No. Because that plan was President Zuma's plan, and he allegedly was corrupt and all that other stuff. Also, it's Russia who's going to build it, and no. We've got to get the West to build stuff like this. Look, if you have some time for extra reading, I want you to Google some of the references that I've left down below. You'll stay shocked. But now, 6 years later in 2020, we so willingly agreed to spend 1.5 trillion, twice what Zuma wanted to spend, on credit for unreliable sources of power to be added above nuclear, which we already use in the country via the Koeberg nuclear power station. Here in South Africa, sometimes we must just understand that siyapekwa and funova. We're going to come back to this nuclear conversation because I think it's very vital that we unpack it. Now that you have context, let's get back to this 163 billion rand loan out of 1.5 trillion, might I say. I meant it's an investment plan, it's not really a loan. So there are 3 components to the Just Energy Transition Plan that has been presented by the Climate Commission: electricity decarbonization, green hydrogen, and new electric vehicles. Now, the current loan model apportions this money in the following ways. 69% or 1 trillion rand will go towards decommissioning coal plants in Mpumalanga. 319 billion rand or 21% will go to green hydrogen. I'm going to come back to this. And 9 to 10% or about 128 billion rand will supposedly go into new electric vehicles. What will not shock you about how this transition will supposedly be funded is that the West is only funding directly 8% of what's needed. Development bank finance institutions like the IMF and the World Bank are pledging to fund 10%, and from private sector, they're looking for 500 billion rand or 33%. Now, if you're good with just simple arithmetic, you'll realize that this isn't 100%. In fact, it's only 50%. The other 50% is still outstanding. What do you even mean? So we're embarking on a plan to close South Africa's power stations, and we don't have all the money that's needed for the plan. Film. Now, I've already stressed how negative the decarbonization part of this plan will be for South Africa, and specifically Mpumalanga. Without a proper and reliable energy source to transition to, we're basically just playing marbles. But I want us to look at hydrogen specifically.
Is that it? Problem solved. We just make tons and tons of green hydrogen and then run our entire economies on it. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple.
One big challenge that remains is hydrogen's relatively low energy density. You need about 3 times more space to store the same amount of punch compared to natural gas. So we'll likely have to build a lot of new storage facilities, depending on how much hydrogen we'll actually need. And how much that's going to be is a tricky question.
Renewable electricity is still a scarce, precious resource, and we should use it as effectively and as efficiently as we can, and hydrogen may not be the best way to do that.
Hydrogen can be used for everything, but that doesn't mean it should. So the future is finding the balance between what we use for battery and what we use for hydrogen.
Now, the idea that hydrogen is an energy source rather than a carrier of energy is a common fallacy. Many people and organizations have been referring to it as the answer to our future energy demands, without considering the fact that producing, storing, and transporting hydrogen requires a sizable amount of clean energy and renewable energy, and sometimes dirty energy. However, hydrogen is still useful for cleaning up some sectors. I won't even get into electric cars, as South Africa firstly needs to get the energy generation needed before we focus on fantasies. In fact, if we're going to go electric, when it comes to our vehicles, we should be looking to China and not the West in how we make that transition make sense for us. That's the irony about this, but that's just my take. If you think differently, let's debate in the comments. Tell me how I'm wrong. Give me the facts. The fact about this entire funding model and proposal makes no sense. The fact of the matter is that this entire JET funding model and proposal doesn't make sense currently. There's a lot of holes. We are funding energy source components that do not offer long-term energy stability or are dependent on fossil fuels to create energy or power, like electric cars being powered from energy that's made from burning coal. Or we are focusing on energy platforms that are still nascent, that are still new and aren't fully developed, or will take too much investment in South Africa's context to get them going. What South Africa's Just Energy Transition Plan glaringly leaves out is nuclear power. And on that note, I think we should look at what an ideal South African energy mix could look like. What's important to know and start to understand about the fight against coal is what is referred to as the energy mix. The energy generation mix, also known as the power mix, refers to the combination of various fuels used to generate electricity in a given geographic area. It's also still dominated by coal at a global level. The Department of Energy wrote a strategy for the composition of South Africa's energy generation portfolio and what it would look like in 2050. 37.4 gigawatts of wind, 21.9 gigawatts of combined cycle gas turbines, 20.3 gigawatts of nuclear, 17.6 gigawatts of solar, 15 gigawatts of coal, 13.3 gigawatts of open cycle gas turbines, 2.5 gigawatts from the Inga hydroelectric dam project, 250 megawatts from landfill gas, and 500 megawatts from demand response. It's crucial to consider the variables and advancements influencing the adoption of the various energy sources at this time. Now, this energy mix was created based on what South Africa needed if all things remained equal and relative to expected population growth and economic and industry power generation needs. This plan was released circa June 2017. So what exactly changed in the 3 years till 2020 when we suddenly created another plan for 1.5 trillion rand that didn't include nor mention nor entertain any nuclear plans for Africa's most industrialized economy? Honestly speaking, I don't know what changed. We can only but speculate. But before I go down a conspiracy theory path that I may never come back from, maybe you guys can tell me in the comments, what do you think changed? But I want us to unpack what could have been if we had included nuclear into this energy mix. The use of nuclear energy is a contentious issue in South Africa, and I don't know why that's the case. The only nuclear plant that we have on the continent is located in Cape Town, and it's running. Yes, it's getting on an age, but it's running. And even though it's one of the safest energy sources, nuclear only currently accounts for 6% of South Africa's energy mix. Nuclear fission or fusion is the process that produces nuclear energy. And while this non-renewable form of energy is seen as environmentally favorable because of its lower levels of greenhouse emissions when compared to other sources such as coal, some worry about the radioactive waste that it produces. For ironic context, in 2022, the EU produced 2,641 terawatt hours of electricity. Almost 40% of this came from renewable sources, credit to them, mainly wind, hydro, and solar. Fossil fuels made up 38.6% and nuclear electricity was at 22%. Natural gas was one of the main fossil fuels used to generate electricity at 19.6%, followed by coal at 15.8%. The United States, as part of its energy mix, uses 8% nuclear, renewable sits at 13%, 33% is natural gas, and petroleum fuels are at 36%. Now, I spoke about irony, and as you can see in both of these cases, it's clear to see that energy mixes are exactly that, a mix of various energy sources. What becomes unclear to me is why, when it comes to South Africa, the focus is on taking coal completely away instead of developing renewables and alternative sources to be good enough to cope with our increased demand. If these Western countries, the ones that are still funding us, use nuclear, why is it not part of our plan? Why is it not being funded? Also, we need to look at the nuclear opportunities that South Africa has missed out on. By not investing in nuclear energy over the last 10 years, we have spent almost the same amount trying to keep the lights on. And I want you to hear me out here. Let's say South Africa had found a way to build a nuclear electricity generation platform, like the one that was being proposed by the Russians. Let's leave the politics out of it just for a second. Whether it was the Russians, the French, or whoever, let's say we started the transition from coal to nuclear in 2013. By this very year, we would have added 9,600 megawatts to the South African grid. Let me tell you, that would have made a world of difference relative to our current circumstances. 9,600 megawatts is about 30% of our average energy availability factor in 2021. This additional capacity would have diversified our energy mix, thus creating energy security. According to the CSIR Energy Center, by 2022, South Africa had an energy generation capacity of 54,000 megawatts. That's if Eskom is operating at 100% capacity. Tough to do when you have old power stations. But the crucial point here is the energy availability factor, which is how much our power stations can generate, taking into account the ones that are out of service and the ones that are just not working. This was sitting at 58.1% in 2022, meaning that our current power stations were only producing around 31,000 megawatts of the 54,000 that we could generate at 100%. So if the 9,600 megawatts from nuclear was added to our grid, we would have created a buffer, allowing for our power stations to be out for a little bit longer and thus better maintained in their old age. But one of the biggest issues that people raised about the Zuma-Russia nuclear deal was the reported cost of $50 billion, or about 700 million in 2013. So you'll be shocked at what the real cost of us not getting nuclear has been. Since load shedding started, the government has spent 250 billion rand on Eskom bailouts, and then there's another 254 billion rand that's been pledged from this year until 2026 by Treasury. Since 2013, as stated by court filings this year, the South African economy has lost more than 1.2 trillion rand due to load shedding, a quarter of our national GDP. We're not even taking into consideration future economic growth losses and Eskom's debt obligations. South Africa has sunk almost 1.7 to 2 trillion rand due to lack of energy planning and just short-term thinking. That amount is double and some of what the cost of the proposed nuclear program would have been under Zuma. I want you to let that sink in. Look, I've never personally agreed with Ubaba, but we need to also be real about what our outlook would have been and what we've lost by not acting on what he had said. And maybe that's the thing. We don't want to admit when we've been wrong or duped by civil society and mainstream media. We are also very vulnerable as a nation, and that makes us a little bit likely to be misled. Nuclear has always been the answer for us, yet it's not part of the 1.5 trillion rand energy plan. That's strange to me. But there's also another opportunity that we're not highlighting in this plan. Our oil and gas opportunity is another addition to our most effective energy mix composition. The Petroleum Agency of South Africa estimates that there are potentially 27 billion barrels of oil and 60 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves just off the shore of South Africa. Also add to that number 200 trillion cubic feet of shale gas reserves that are onshore and have been tentatively confirmed in the Karoo. Yes. This is all, however, very tentative and yet to be proven through seismic exploration. On a conservative estimation, this oil and gas opportunity could be a 10 to 20 trillion dollar opportunity for South Africa. That's trillion with a T. The gas deposits could help South Africa achieve a net zero emissions by 2050. If South Africa could effectively exploit these resources, this would be a much needed economic tax, government and corporate boost for the country for at least the next century. But there are also self-imposed hurdles here. Legal processes lodged by coastal communities in South Africa to block this oil and gas exploration have effectively halted 1 billion rand in exploration investment in just the last year. We as South Africans need to begin to frankly discuss how we balance the goal of energy security, unemployment, poverty, while meeting our climate change commitments. We must also understand the geopolitical chess match that is being played in our absence at global tables due to this newfound economic potential. There are countries that don't want us to win. These are the facts. Coal is South Africa's most widely accessible and reasonably priced source of primary energy. The truth is that we are also still very much a developing nation. We are not a naive country. We are aware of the many global problems associated with coal, not the least of which is the environmental deterioration that wasn't started by us, but must now be likely solved by us and them equally. It doesn't make sense. The truth is that we currently don't have many options available to us as a country, but to keep burning coal, at least for the foreseeable future. We must also look into how we view stable, proven technologies like nuclear and add them to our proposed future energy mix, like we did under Zuma. We must also look at the money that we have lost while we have been dilly-dallying and not making decisions. Domestically, coal will continue to be an essential part of our economy's recovery, reconstruction, and growth. We are aware that countries and global corporations will work to lessen their environmental impact, and also they'll adhere to more climate policies. Coal use will inevitably decrease. We know this very well. we know that we must transition. But we must also understand that as an African country with this precious resource in spades, we must not cut out our options for current and future economic growth and sustainability. Looking at the addition of oil and gas into our energy mix must be prioritized immediately. Through this, we would solve our future coal issues and also our energy mix issues. We, the citizens of this country, the coal industry, and in fact, the energy industry in its entirety, must be allowed to map out our own sovereign future. And while we cannot deny the need for an energy transition, we must ensure that a just energy transition favors our national development interests. All energy platforms are needed and wanted. They just have to prove that they are good enough to help and are viable for South Africa right now. Independent power producers aren't the answer alone. They are a part of the answer. We need them just as much as we need other forms of energy. Whatever transition we sign up for must speak to the contribution of coal energy security, its contribution to our GDP, its contribution to the average South African employee within the industry, as well as other contributing socio-economic factors. We must not rush things when so much can break so quickly. In fact, why must South Africa close its coal-fired power stations when it's all we have right now? Why can't the same Western countries offer nuclear power capabilities at zero cost if they're so desperate for us to get off coal? Our proposed climate change agenda cannot afford to ignore our national self-interest. These interests must be integrated into our plans to move to low carbon emissions. This battle is yours to fight, South Africa. It's my battle, it's your battle. Your way of life, your individual business interests, your social interests, your children's futures are tied to this very coal issue. We should never be shy to voice out and fight for South Africa's national interest on the global stage, whether it's on coal mining and coal power stations or any other point of discussion or contention. And finally, to all those who vilify and shame South Africa for its continued use of coal, I want you to understand that on this supposedly dark continent, all we're trying to do is keep the lights on.